Hello, YouTube. Today I wanted to share with you some interesting things that I found. In particular, I was looking for what can I use to integrate large language models into a Ruby application or Ruby on Rails application. In particular, I was looking for things that would allow me to interact with Ollama. I have Ollama locally, and I wanted to interact with it, so I could experiment with it without incurring a bunch of fees or expenses. So searching, I found Ollama AI, and this is kind of a lower level gem for interacting with Ollama locally. Um, when I was looking at it, I actually found something else called Nanobots, and then I thought to myself, who doesn't love Nanobots? Like, I want to use a Nanobot. It said it was a high level abstraction or more user friendly tools. So looking at that, I found Nanobots, and then I found that it's a kind of an abstraction to allow you to use different large language models, including Ollama, which is what I was interested in at the time. But I do like the idea of being able to interchangeably use this tool for other large language models. So looking further into it, I found that the whole premise behind it is to have a very focused large language model bot. In this case, it uses cartridges. Who doesn't love cartridge? When I thought of that, a bot with a cartridge, it's like old school Nintendo vibes for me. So I thought that was super cool. But with the cartridge, you basically, give it some meta information about the cartridge, but then you can say how it reacts. And then you have the configuration for the provider. So a lot of the different providers function the same. Some of them have some other functionality, such as tools and other things that your bot may use. And so basically, the nanobot takes you create it, nanobot.new, and then you supply the cartridge, and then you can interact with that bot inside of Ruby and do the things that you want to do. So I thought that was really interesting. What I also found was that there was this entire specification on specs.mbots.io. Um, and so I found that really interesting. So there's a lot of extra functionality you can have on behaviors. You have your directive, what it does. You can give it a backdrop, so it has maybe some background information on the request. So um, the way that I used or wanted to use nanobots was have very specific large language model tasks, almost like an AI agent that I'm passing very specific instructions to, and I'm expecting very specific outputs from without, I'm trying to limit the variability that I have to deal with programmatically in my application downstream with that input. So Nanobots, in my mind, allows me to do very focused AI agents that I can chain together, so to speak, and utilize to get the outputs that I desire. So, real quick, you have your backdrop you can set up. You can set up your directive. You can even have your, um, there's a bunch of different functionality in here, but just say that there's a lot of configuration that you can do here. And I'll show you kind of some of the stuff that I've done and how I'm using that in my Ruby applications. So you have an idea of how that works. So real quick, let's go over the basic functionality of how you use one of these. Um, so inside your Ruby application, you would require nanobots. You would create the bot, reference your cartridge. And so the cartridges, I think, typically are supposed to be YAML files, but what I did in my application is I just created a hash, and they said that you could do that. So I'm passing a hash in it with the characteristics that I want, and then you can interact with it. So if we go through that process, let's just do that real quick. So let's just do an RB session. Um, and I like showing people how to do some of the stuff in the most simplest way first, and then I can show you how you build on that and do more complicated interactions. So in this case, we're going to require nanobots, right? We're going to create a bot. nanobot.new, and then we're passing in that cartridge parameter, and I'm going to use test.yaml. And if I go over to my NeoVim instance, this is that test YAML file that I have. So really quickly, I think it's super useful to show you this. So this is your meta information, no big deal, right? Behaviors. You can do directive, and you saw the backdrop that I showed you earlier. But the boot, this is how it starts up. This is maybe what's queuing it for the first interaction. Now, when I use these bots, I don't have any boot directives. I don't use that functionality. I'm just I'm telling it, hey, this is the directive, this is the backdrop, this is what I want from you, and then I pass information to it, and then I get it back. In the instructions, it talks about setting environmental variables for capturing the credentials and the address and all that for your provider. Now, in this case, I'm doing a very contrived version of this. I'm just passing in a address, and this is the localhost address of your Ollama client. So if you have Ollama running locally and you do a netstat and you look at it, you'll look for it, you'll see it's running on this port more than likely. I didn't know that myself. I just thought I would run Ollama and then interact with it. But if you have it installed, in a lot of cases, it may be running a service on your computer, and that port's listening. So just a heads up on that. So I just have it pointing at my local machine. I like this because I'm not incurring any costs. I'm not setting up anything with a credit card. I just really, I don't know how much I'm going to use with this, and I kind of want to have an idea of locally what the performance impacts are of doing some of these things before I go out to a cloud and then start incurring a bunch of charges at scale. That could be problematic. So going back to the IRB session, so I've created the bot. So now the bot has two basic interactions. You can do eval, and this is what I'm doing is I'm inserting or supplying one-time inputs to the bot and getting an output. So I can say, hello, my name is Joe Bob. Okay. And then it's going to respond to you. So that is interesting. Now, the other way to do it is through a REPL. Okay. Now, you may want to do something like a REPL where you're streaming back the response as it happens to your user, and you can do that. Or you can use it from the console like I do. And so you'll see that it's going to give you a message, and then you'll see a little nanobot icon. So in the configuration, that is what you can set. So that is configurable, and you can just say hello. Okay. Not a whole lot here, but I'm showing you at least the very basic use case. Okay. So I can truncate that and I'm done. So that's how you use a nanobot. Now, if I go into one of my applications that I have, that I'm just kind of a toy application that I have, I've set up background jobs. Okay, so one of the things that I'm doing with this application is I am calling a background job, and I'm looking at a particular piece of data, and I'm having it interpolate information that doesn't exist from that using the model. So in this case, I'm having the application look at a scope statement, and then or for a project, and then I'm having it go through and say, hey, these are the objectives for that project. These are the deliverables for that objective. These are the tasks for that deliverable. And that way I can basically build out an entire schedule. So I have a few things like that. I can, the idea is the dream is to have a non-technical user interact with the app, provide some basic information, at least provide a scaffolding for what the task that they may use through a large language model, and then allow them to interact with it. So here's kind of what that looks like, that background job that I've set up. I pass in some parameters for the user. I'm just setting those values. I'm setting up that cartridge up front. So I've set up the cartridge, and I'm still using that local host. And one of the things that I'm doing on here is, I'm telling it the format is JSON. So I'm kind of driving what the expectation is. I'm also telling it in the interaction that I expect JSON. The response should only contain JSON with no narrative. And keep in mind, this is me just using this as a first time user with it. So I'm kind of experimenting with it. Some of this stuff may not be required, but that's kind of what I was thinking I needed to do. I also told it when it returns a list of tasks. In this case, I'm saying it, give me the tasks to complete this deliverable. I'm asking it to return that in JSON format under tasks. So when it returns an object, it's actually returning an object with tasks and then multiple elements underneath that tasks object. And each of those should have a title and a duration in days. Okay? So that's what I'm expecting. So I give it a little bit of background information on what a deliverable is or what a task is. I'm saying I say for a backdrop, a task that represents a piece of executable scope and has a title and description and duration. The task is a discrete unit of work required to complete the deliverable. And that's that. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually creating a hash of information to pass to the large language model. So I told it that I'd give it the project scope, the objective, and the deliverable scope. So what this does is I wanted to provide a little bit more context on what it was, the task that it was creating. So it's, hey, you're creating this deliverable and you're telling me how the tasks are, that the tasks that need to be performed for this step, and I'm giving you the objective that this deliverable is trying to meet. And then I'm also this is also belongs to this project. So I create the input, then I create the deliverable to task bot. So that's the well, actually, I created a nano agent model or class that basically functions a certain way, and I can go into that. But that's all that's really doing is it's taking the output of that nanobot. Well, it creates a nanobot with this cartridge, takes the output of that, and then it converts it. It processes that input safely, and then it deals with different types of errors that would happen when you parse that JSON. JSON parsing could fail. From the AI agent, there could be another error. How do I handle that? And then also what the output's supposed to be. So it knows to extract the data out of the tasks JSON element, and it gives me this list, so to speak. All right. Well, it gives me this bot. Anyways, so I run the bot and I ask it to process the input safely, and I give it that input in JSON format. It gives me the output. I check to see if the output's valid, and then I iterate over that data and I create all the tasks that I need. So this is kind of a little bit more further in depth than maybe just what I showed you, but it kind of shows you what I did. Let me open up the class for that nanobot so you can see it, or the nano agent. So the nano agent, I'm requiring JSON nanobots. I have a target that can be read. Initialize it. I provide the cartridge. Apply the target. I create a bot. For processing input, I just do JSON parse on the bot evaluating the input. So when I had the evaluation earlier on the input, that is that same command. So I'm converting it to JSON, and then I'm creating it to a hash, or converting it to a hash. And that's just gonna make it easier for me to use it. So when I process that input safely, I basically create these structures that I'm going to output into. It's just going to have result error or error details. I process the input. If there should be no error. And then if there's a list of errors, like the details of the errors, I can pass it to it. But if I have a parse error on the JSON, I can, recover from that. If I have a standard error, I can recover from that. And that's what that nano agent does. But back inside of the function that I've created, I have so going back over this, I have the cartridge. I'm defining the input that I'm going to provide to it. I've set up the nano agent, which is that nanobot. It's just a wrapper. Now you don't need to do that. That's just what I did because I wanted to make sure that I could deal with that issues with the data coming back from the service. And I'll probably need to do a lot more with that, but this is just what I've done to date. So I then process the input, and I get a list of tasks to process. So I'm actually iterating through those tasks, and then I'm creating a task for each one of those. And I have a function. So this is creating a task inside of my application, which is basically an activity or a step that you're going to go through in a Gantt chart. So I have all this information that I'm assigned to that. And I have some business logic as far as what the task code looks like in the system. So from my local applications, let me just log into this. So the idea was that the user would come in here. The user comes in and they go give their project a title, give it a scope statement. So the user would give the scope statement for this project, and then would have the ability for the project or the application to kind of generate how you would execute that scope based off of this. Now, my idea is that the user can do it incrementally all at once. So maybe they can generate a list of objectives or their work breakdown structure, and then they can fine tune it and then have it generate more for them if they want or not. So if I go back, let's say I've written my scope statement. I would go in here and I'd say, let's create the objectives and deliverables. And so what I was trying to do for people that don't know about a work breakdown structure, and maybe you guys don't know about a work breakdown structure, but it's basically like an outline for how you're going to execute the scope of your project. And so in order to simplify that, what I did is I said, well, let's find out what the objectives of the project are. Okay. And then from there, let's say, what are the deliverables that I have to execute for that objective to execute this project? So what I did, and I need to work on this interface and how this works, but I created a little generate WBS from scope button. And so what you'll see is that this is the server console. So it's made the call. Let's see if I have actually. So this is my local machine being impacted by the Ollama process that's running in the background. So it hits it pretty hard. So this request is being processed by that agent. It started that job. And then when it's done here, I need to add the updates into the interface, but it's starting to add. So it's read my scope statement. It started to create the objective. So if I click on that, it actually came up with a scope statement. Now this is very basic because the scope statement that I have is very basic, but the Ollama large language model said, hey, this is what I need to do. I need to integrate AI agents into Pico PM. So I actually wrote the scope statement for exactly what I was doing, which is integrating artificial intelligence agents into this application. And then it's going to go out and figure out what those steps are. So the first step that it has is integrate AI agents into Pico PM. And it says develop a system that allows AI agents to interact with Pico PM, enabling seamless project management automation of tasks. And that's great. So as you can see, it's now added all these other ones into the application. So for each objective, it's going to have deliverables. So it's saying AI agent development framework, automated task assignment system, project status update system, expense tracking and management system, weekly analysis and reporting module. So each one of those, it has its own scope statement, right? So again, I'm just sending a request. I'm saying, give me JSON. These are the elements that I want back from you. I'm then parsing that JSON, and then I'm loading it into my application. Of course, I have some user ownership permissions on who can do what to which project, but that is really cool. So it's gone through. It's gone through and done all these. Okay, so the idea is that the user, goes through and creates a project. They give it a scope statement. They create a outline or the work breakdown structure that has all of the objectives of the project from that scope statement. It also has deliverables. The users could then come in here and say, oh, okay, well, I don't like these, or they can edit or modify or delete these things that they don't want or add to it. They would then continue with their project setup. Now there's calendars here, which, I'm not going to get into that. But the other component of it is it can actually look at the deliverables and say, hey, these are the type of resources that I would need on this type of project. And it will generate those. So I actually had it generate. I didn't come up with these, but it came up with, hey, this is what the hourly rate is. Now, these are totally, you probably would want to have a more sane approach to this, but it came up with these and it added those in here, which I thought was kind of cool. I mean, and that's all through the Nanobot, the local simple Ollama agent that I have. Okay, so there's a generate resources from deliverables, right? So if I go through the project setup and I keep going, there's a create baseline. So this is a baseline schedule that I've set up. So you can manage your baseline. So you'll notice here that I'm still working on a lot of these interfaces. So, I'm not a GUI designer. But, here's your structure of your project. So I'm going to say, hey, for this AI agent development framework, generate a list of tasks that you wish to execute. So in the background, what I have is I just have like a turbo stream. This is like a button that generates a turbo stream that executes one of my background jobs for creating tasks from this. So and I need to change this. I need to change the color and maybe have like an icon spinning and have a loading interface. But as you can see, it's just like totally blasting this. This response it's blasting this Ollama. I don't have this is a laptop that this is running on, so it's not the fastest machine. It's just a 6900HX, and I think it has a 6900 graphics card that it runs on. I'm not even sure if it's using my GPU at all. Probably isn't. It's probably just using my CPU. Anyways, so what you can see here is it's added these elements. It's added these activities. So it says conduct user acceptance testing. It's created for all these different items. It says, hey, these are the tasks that you need to, or activities that you need to complete this deliverable. So anyways, I thought that was really cool. Obviously I need to clean up, have it clear this out once it's finished adding activities. But that's the general idea of how this is useful. So as people would use a generative AI or large language model to do a step, generate data based off of input, I'm basically applying the same methodology to doing a task that a project manager may do. Um, and the more information that you give it, the better your output's going to be. Okay, so um, each one of these is those elements in the work breakdown structure that is based off of the text. Now the user could go in there and add more information and get an even better product with this output. Um, so going back to that, the generate task from deliverable, and that's exactly what this is. That's all I'm doing here. Um, so I go through and I create the cartridge. I give it the input data that I'm gonna run the task against. So I'm running it for a certain user, a certain schedule, a certain deliverable. Um, and then I say, this is what I'm going to execute and what I'm going to output. This is the input that I'm going to provide. I'm going to convert that to JSON, pass it into the nanobot. I'm going to execute it, and then I will iterate over it. Okay. So I have some, it does some validation on the results just to make sure that it has tasks, that they exist, the result's valid. And then it creates a task for each one of those and passes in a sequence number. So that's how I'm using it. I thought that was interesting. Maybe it's kind of exciting with just the basic language model that I have, what I was able to have it do, which is basically go and base off a project scope, create the project structure, create the tasks to execute the deliverables, even come up with the resources that I need to execute that process. So that's pretty much all I have to share today, but I thought maybe that's useful to somebody, maybe not. But if you're interested, like and subscribe. If you want me to go over something specific, I will. I'm probably going to have some other things in here later on, maybe on how I'm using Hotwire with these background jobs, which is probably useful. I think that's one of the problems a lot of people have is, you know, having an interactive interface, dealing with the background jobs and how it's updating your application. And, I'm using turbo streams for that. And I'm using some backend logic to broadcast those to a very specific location. So anyways, I appreciate your views, and like and subscribe maybe, maybe not. Thank you so much.